Okay, so now what I'm going to show you is how to transfer your design that you've created on a piece of paper onto the surface of your mug. So the construction of the mug happens in one day, and then this design transfer, if you haven't done the stamp design on the surface, then the design transfer happens in a second class. What you're going to do is take this design and actually wrap it around your mug here. It's not going to match up perfectly. You're going to have about an inch or a little less than an inch of space, and that's because you have the width of the clay to contend with at this point. So to keep this secure so I can start tracing over my design, I am going to take this and tape it from paper to paper. And that just keeps it from moving all around. So here is where I'm just going to take a pen or a pencil, not a pin tool, and start to trace over what I've created. It's going to leave a very faint line on the surface here, and then you go and refine the areas that you want to after the fact. So I'm just going to take a pencil and trace over my design. If you have a very intricate design, you probably just want to do the outline and then maybe freehand some smaller details on there, but at least get the main structure of your design traced. I won't do this whole thing because it's a demo, but you can do this in one class, and then I wouldn't leave the paper on the surface because it would absorb some of the moisture and begin to disintegrate on the surface. It's not the end of the world if paper gets stuck to your clay. It's just going to burn off in the kiln, but it is a little bit easier to do the design without having paper stuck all over it. So once you transfer your whole design on the mug here, you would peel this off, and it's going to be hard to see, but you'll have a very faint design imprinted into the surface. And then you're going to take your pin tool, and if you hold it at an angle and trace over your lines, you can really go ahead and define your design. I'm not holding the pin tool straight up and down because that's going to create a very harsh line that has all the little crumbles on the edges. And this way you're getting a very clean line. It receives glaze really well on the inside. It's nice and smooth. Another reason why you're not doing this step in when it's flat is because you're cutting into the surface a little bit. And if I did this in a flat state and then tried to turn the mug or bend the slab into a mug shape, it would stretch and weaken the areas that I've carved into because it creates kind of like a cut in the clay. So it's creating a sturdier mug when you are drawing the lines on after the fact. Okay, now I've taken some time and have transferred my design all the way on the outside, so the outer part is pretty much exactly how I want it to be. It's stiffened up a little bit because I've let it sit out for a while. And now the last thing that I want to do is apply any sort of three-dimensional design to the surface. That's another part of the design element that you can use to create some dimension to the surface and really play with parts of your design. For instance, on this mug here, this is a nice little musical staff that goes all the way around, but some of the notes on the outside as well as kind of the scale. Here, this is 3D. It pops off the surface. So that can give some dimension to the surface. And you can also carve in to the slab using the tiny little loop tools. This here, also some of the squares in different colors come off the surface. and I'll show you how to use your original design template, so don't throw this away, to create perfectly shaped three-dimensional additions that you can score and slip to the outside of your mug. The one thing that I have done is I pre-rolled a really thin slab. So this slab here is very, very thin. It's probably about 1/8 of an inch thick, because I don't want to add a lot of weight to the surface, but I still want there to be some dimension to it. I don't need to add a ton of clay, so I want a really thin slab. So I'm just going to smooth the canvas texture off of this really thin piece here. I'm only going to do one side of it because the other side is going to be scored and slipped and attached to the surface of the mug, so I don't need to smooth that down. But I will take the time and smooth one surface of it. Now, this is where it's totally up to you what you want to be sticking out of your design. My sort of topographical sketch here, I'm gonna go with the interior parts and create a little bit of a layered effect here. So what I'm going to do is decide which areas that I want to be at a certain level. So for instance, this sort of outer teardrop shape, I'm gonna trace. So I wanna find that shape on my design here. And what I'm gonna do is actually just take my design, place it down, take a pencil and trace over the shape that I want to cut out and attach to the surface. So I'm gonna do that. And then I also want this inner part to stick up another tiny level as well. But I want to score and slip that onto it separately. So I'm just going to move my template over and draw the inner part here. So I'll have two thin slabs to attach to the surface. So I'll just take my pin tool and cut out one piece and then cut out the other piece. So now I have these really thin pieces here that I will score and slip to the surface. So what I'm going to do is line this up, and I would score, this is how it's going to look. It almost looks like a peacock feather, but I've got two different levels here, but I need to score and slip things together. So I'll take my pin tool and score within the design. And I want to make sure that it's really roughed up, because when you're attaching slabs on top of slabs, there is a greater chance that you're going to trap air in there. And it's also on a curve here, so you don't want to, you want it to be attached really well and not sort of peeling off. So I'll take the back side here and score the back of this with my pin tool, and then just put some slip on it and squish it on. The good thing about attaching these really thin pieces is you don't need to seal it up, seal the edge with a coil. These are not holding any weight. They're fairly light, so they don't need the reinforcement of a coil around them, but what you can do to smooth it so you don't see the rough edges is just take a little bit of water on a paintbrush and then just go around the edge. So I'll score and slip this on, line it up, and then smush it down. So once I have that first part attached, I'll do the same thing. I'll take my second piece, and you don't have to have this layered look here, but this is how you can create kind of a layered piece. I would take this little piece here, trace around so I know where I'm going to score. Pop it off, score this area, and score the back of that other piece and pop it on. to create more dimension in the surface. So if you want like areas that are carved out of the surface, you can use the larger loop tools. That is a little bit more aggressive in carving away larger areas, but I do have tiny loop tools that are used to do fine design squishing. So here's so these tools in this little mug here, you can use, they're just really, really little metal tools. You can kind of see. And those can be used to carve into the surface to create more dimension. If I wanted, you know, a larger area here to be carved away, I can use that. The one thing you have to be careful of is carving too deep, because you don't want to create a weak spot, but this is a good way to create even more dimension in your design. It's hard to see in the video, but. So now I have designs carved into the surface. I have the surface of the mug that has designs drawn on, and then I have a third and fourth layer of designs scored and slipped to the surface. So once you've created your whole design, the last thing that you're going to do is attach a handle. So you want the design to be completely done before you put a handle on it. That way you're not going to knock off the handle as you start to finish your design, because the handle, once it's scored and slipped on, you just want to let it sit and rest. I'll show you a couple different options of handle designs. So I'll just stick this aside, and I have pre-rolled a slab here. The thickness of the slab is the 2 thicker boards, so it's the same thickness as the thickness of the mug. You definitely do not want to go thinner than the thickness of the mug, because it needs to be sturdy enough to hold up the weight of the clay as well as whatever you put in the inside. So make sure that you're using at least 2 thick boards. You could even use a thick and a thin board if you really want a more sturdy handle, but 2 thick boards should be okay. So I'm going to smooth this out. I'll show you some slab handles and then a coil handle. Let's see, these are slab handles here. So this is a slab handle that's kind of a nice comfort shape. It's flared at the top and the bottom and a little bit more narrow in the middle, so it's comfortable to hold. You can also do a really sort of geometric shape. This is a slab handle that's more designed to be in line with the actual surface design. So it's looks like a rectangle. The design that's carved into the outside of the mug is also on the handle itself. This one is a slab handle as well that, again, sort of is, I think this is some musical thing, the G clef, is that what it's called? No idea. But that mimics the design that's on the outside as well. You can also just do a more traditional handle that doesn't have any sort of reference to the design on the surface. It's completely up to you. So I smooth everything out, and then I'll just cut a couple of shapes into the surface here so you can see. It's pretty easy. So I'll show you how to do this is like a strap handle here. It's one of my more favorite shapes of handles, and it's just this exaggerated eye. So it's wide at the top, narrow in the middle, and then it gets wider at the bottom. And that's, so your hand's gonna handle it and pick it up at the bottom here. I also am not worrying about how long it is. I'm making it longer than I need to right now. I can always cut it down if I want to. That's one shape. I can just do a straight handle, a little bit thinner, And this is one that you might want to do if you have a very geometric design. You can also do a more non-traditional handle shape by actually creating maybe a circle and then doing the inside. And then actually having this be more of like a finger hold or something like that. Or it can be a totally made up sort of handle. Maybe it looks like that. I don't know. Anything that you can kind of get your hand into would work as a handle with the slabs. So you can be pretty creative with the shape. Now, once I cut all these out, I'll show you how to just refine it a little bit so it doesn't look so blocky and uncomfortable. So here we've got, 4 different types of handles here. You also want to decide on the mug where it's going to go. A good spot is usually the seam that you've attached, because that's probably where it's the messiest and maybe the most uneven, where a handle can really kind of disguise any areas that you might not like. But before I attach and size the handle, what I want to do is round the edges of this, because you're cutting it out of a slab, you're going to have sharper edges on the top and the bottom. So I'm just going to take my fingers and push down on one side. You can also use a sponge and a little bit of water. Flip it over and do the same thing, push down and smooth, so it's just more rounded. You don't have to do this. If you want something to be very angular, you can kind of keep it, but I would definitely just run your finger along the seam so it doesn't have sharp edges. But here's one handle, so I would just kind of size it, score and slip it. That would be a handle here. Make sure that it's straight up and down, and score and slip onto the surface. You probably are going to need an extra piece of clay to smooth and fill in the areas and really make sure that it's secure. That's one idea for a handle. The strap handle here, I'll just keep very angular, so I'm going to smooth it minimally. And you can sort of manipulate it into the shape that you want and figure out how that's going to go on the mug. You can be very deliberate and do a more angled piece. Now again, the clay is going to be super soft, so once you create the shape that you like, you might want to let it sit out for a little bit or blow dry it, so it holds its shape and doesn't droop once you start to score and slip it on. So for this one, I'd probably kind of let it sit in that shape for a little bit. Here's just a funky handle, which doesn't, probably round this one a little bit. Doesn't really make sense with my design, but maybe for whatever somebody else's design is totally abstract, this one might work well. I'll just cut this straight so it fits the side of the mug. So now you've got more of a designed handle. Oops. And you would score and slip these here. You can kind of grab it. Not all that comfortable, but sometimes comfort is not everything. And then the last one is a more modern, just a little handle like this for fingers. Could just kind of go down up at the top. Maybe it goes down at the bottom, right in the middle. So those are just your options of how to make handles using slabs. If you wanted to make a coil handle, so something that's more rounded and a little bit more elegant looking, let me just squish some clay here. what I would do is roll a tapered coil. So a tapered coil means that it's thicker at the top than it is at the bottom. And I'm just smoothing this out so it gets fat up here. It looks like a carrot. And then you start bending this into a more traditional handle shape. One thing you have to be careful of is you don't want the bottom part of this handle to be too thin, because you want it, again, to be secured well enough that it's not going to fall off or crack off in the kiln. So I'll probably cut it here and start to bend it into the shape that I want. Now I can score and slip it up the side like this. I can bend this out a little bit and make a little curly Q like that. I could flip it upside down and have it almost like an octopus tentacle, but it'll be something like that. So again, you're just scoring and slipping the base and the top part here. What you don't want to do is create a handle that's very, very thin and then just score and slip it right like that. That's too small of a point of attachment to hold everything up. So that you want to at least have it at more of an angle or have it thicker where you attach it. And those are your options for handles.